So, Angus, take it away, my friend.
Sure. So I started working in journalism about 4 years ago. Like probably many of you, I was doing research in science. I was working at a lab, a geosciences lab at Princeton University, doing some hard rock geology. We were studying zircons, which is a good way to figure out how old stuff are. Um, and I was sort of vaguely interested in doing science communication and science writing. I actually hadn't quite crossed my mind to do science journalism in particular, um, but I sort of by chance ended up meeting a science reporter named Richard Kerr, who was at Science Magazine at AAAS in the winter of like 2014 slash 2015. Um, and he, well, the first thing he asked me is if I was interested in freelancing. And I was like, yeah, sure. Um, what is that? And he was like, oh no, you don't want to freelance. Trust me, it's a horrible way to live your life, and there's nothing good about it. But if you really want to do it, I'll show you how. Um, and uh, uh, and so he was like, what you do is you pitch this guy who runs the news, sort of the news section at Science, and you say, hey, I have a story idea. Would you like to buy it? And I I was like, okay, that doesn't sound too hard, I suppose. I'll give it a try. Um, at the time, I actually did not realize how hard it was going to be. Um, but that is essentially how it got started. So the I think that night I sent an email to the science editor at Science Magazine and said, hey, would you like a story from me about how some people are thinking of using volcanoes to generate electricity? This is sort of in line with some of the work that I was doing at Princeton and the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. Um, and he thought it was cool, and I ended up writing it that week. Um, it was and that was sort of very eye-opening experience for me because it made me realize that there was a way that I could engage in science and do things about science that excited me, that didn't really have to do with this traditional research route. And I just all I really knew at the time was I wanted to keep doing it and do more of it. Um, and that is sort of how it started. I Over sort of the next year, while I was still working at Princeton, I started freelancing more and writing more and doing my actual job less, um, which which eventually culminated in me quitting my job and taking an internship at WNYC Public Radio, at a sort of a daily news analysis team called The Takeaway, which is this radio show that's syndicated in a bunch of radio stations across the country. Um, and yeah, and that is sort of the point A to point B journey of how I found out that I wanted to be a journalist, specifically a science journalist, and uh, how I sort of snuck into this industry without really having any prior background or knowledge of like of how it's done.
Angus, what's your day to day like? I
Yeah.
think when you don't work at an office, there's this idea of like, freelancing. It's like how much you work is how much you get paid. And
Mm.
but I'm kind of interested in the before we talk about like how you build relationships with editors and that kind of stuff. What is like? I understand it's probably different every day, but what's your general workflow and what's your day to day like?
Yeah. So if I'm working on a story, then that will sort of be the first thing that I do when I sit down to work um, for the day. Uh, I'm not sure how familiar any of you are with the process of reporting a story, but this will basically involve doing research, looking for sources to talk to, people who can just educate me about the the story that I'm writing and tell me um, like what happened to them, so that I can actually write something about them. Um, and and then at the end of all of this sort of this essentially this learning process, that's what reporting really is a long kind of learning process. You sit down and you write a story out of it. And I would say that probably is like 50 to 60% of my time is just reporting and writing. And occasionally I'll do some small editing contracts with people where they'll send me some copy for a magazine or whatever publication they're working for, and they say, hey, I don't really have time to edit this. Can you just like look at the story, edit it, and send it back to me? Which is maybe like 5% of the time. Someone actually has their hand raised. Christopher Sunderick, in the participant bar. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. If it's about what Angus is talking about, go ahead and ask. You have to unmute yourself first. Oh, you're unmuted. Go for it. Oh, let me see. Oh, what are the pitch guidelines for a scientific magazine? What does your pitch look like? That's what Christopher wanted to ask.
Yeah, okay. So this is like another really significant portion of the time of like sort of my day-to-day life is pitching people. And every publication has a different way that they want you to pitch to them. Right now I'm working the most with Scientific American, and they basically like a pitch that kind of explains the story a little bit at the beginning, provides a little bit of background, and then shows that this is a topic that hasn't been explored much in mainstream media before. Well, I would say like maybe 90% of the places that you end up pitching are going to have this type of format. Some places prefer slightly longer pitches, like the New York Times will like, the Science Times of the New York Times likes around 300 words. Other places prefer much shorter pitches, like NPR. I found that with NPR, the most successful pitches tend to be ones that are under like 150 words or even under 100 words. So you do need to get all of that information, like what the story is, why it's important, maybe a little bit of background, and then finally that it hasn't been covered much before by other people.
Angus, can I just say, a lot of the scientists in our communities, you guys will email me like, what's the best way to pitch to Scientific American? And for the love of God, Google how to pitch to Scientific American before you send me that email. There are 1,000 of you now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, if you're like, how do I pitch to this? Almost every outlet that we work with has a pitch template or some kind of online, this is what we're looking for with our pitch. That's a very easy way to know, what kind of pitches they're looking for. And then the other thing that Angus said that I just really want to highlight, something we run into when we see the office hours program, is look at that outlet before you pitch to it. See what kind of things they're looking for. Somebody pitched me a story that had been covered by that outlet like 4 or 5 different times. And so there are a couple of really easy things you can do to save yourself a lot of headache, and that's find out how they like their pitches. And then make sure, like really do your homework to make sure this isn't something that's been covered 6 different ways already. And that's something that I think young journalists, or young science communicators really, struggle to do, is realize that you're not the first person with this idea in a lot of times. And so a way that pitches that are really successful is say like, I saw you did this piece on Titan, but this is a different angle on this story that you guys haven't really, thought of or haven't covered yet. And that shows the publication that you also have some idea of what they do and why and what they're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I'm not sure how many of you are scientists, but for those of you who are scientists, you know that when you are proposing research or you're trying to get grants or submitting a manuscript, the same rules apply. Like, the people who are editing these things or giving out grants want to see novelty. They want to see something new. And I think in journalism, often it's even more so that it needs to be really fresh in some way. I think that's actually the most important thing when you're pitching to anybody, is to show that you have either a unique perspective or ability to show something, or just or even just have a story that that people haven't quite heard before. Especially in mainstream media, if you're pitching to those types of places. So yeah, and along the lines of pitching, I probably spend 30% of my time, like 30 to 40% of my time just looking for story ideas. and that will be spending time reading the news, thinking about sort of things that I've seen in the news, and thinking like, well, is there something about this that I haven't quite seen before? Is there a question here that's been unanswered, and maybe somebody out there knows the answer to that question, but it hasn't been discussed yet? So that is kind of a way to sort of think about stuff and find stories that can be really interesting. That is sort of has sort of this novelty element that hasn't just like sort of just a little bit of think sort of questioning that you can bring to the table. Yeah.
So Angus, so still like for people that were coming in and out, as far as like your day goes, like 50% of it's reporting on stuff, on stories that you've already sold to editors and have agreed that this is going to be a story you're working on. The other vast majority is looking for stories that have a novelty or a different angle. So you're, even while you're reporting, you're constantly searching for your next story. And then you also do some freelance editing work. So those are like the majority of your workday. And I think it's really interesting that, you know, you have to be 50% working on something you've already done, but still looking for selling your next story. And I think that's one thing that people are intimidated about freelancing is like, how do you assure that you have regular work? And we can talk about that a little bit. I also want to talk about, you know, building relationships with specific editors, because I have to imagine once you've worked with an editor quite a few times, it makes it easier to get pieces accepted, right?
Yeah, definitely. The more you build a relationship with someone, the less work you kind of have to put in. I mean, I don't want to actually say that like you shouldn't take your editors for granted and just sort of say like, oh, you know, here's a story. Do you just want to like buy it and not really adhere to all the pitch guidelines that you know they like? Just because that's kind of an inconsiderate thing to do to your editor. But it is true that the better relationship you have with an editor, and the better sort of reputation that you have with a certain publication, the more risks you can sort of take in pitching to them. You can start to pitch longer, more complicated stories, and then they'll sort of feel better about assigning those to you because they know that your work is good, and they feel like you can handle something that might be, you know, instead of like 800 to 1,000 words, they'll trust that you can write a story that's 2,000 words. And you can also get to this point in your relationship where you can sort of bounce ideas off of them and say, oh, I'm really interested in this thing. Do you know of anything, like, have you seen any press releases that, you know, I might have missed or didn't get that is related to this? And then kind of involve them a little bit in your search process. And I think you need a pretty good relationship with someone to do that. The last big advantage is that sometimes they'll just give you stuff to do, where, you know, they have come up with a story idea and they'll just say like, hey, here's something that we want written for us. Can you just do it? And that kind of eliminates like 40% of your work already or more, since the story searching process can be very difficult and long and intensive.
Okay, awesome. Sadie had a questions, and then Huckins, I will get to you. So Sadie, why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, so I was wondering, you talk about how you published with Scientific American and Science Magazine. Have you ever tried to pitch to non-like science outlets, and do you have to alter your pitch if you're trying to go for like your local newspaper versus someone who like specifically covers science?
Yeah, so I've pitched to a few places like that. Let me think. I would say the majority, almost like the vast majority of my work goes to sort of science-focused publications or science-focused teams at wider publications like NPR or the New York Times or something. So I would say, I mean, one thing I would say actually is that because science is now such a popular and huge beat, most big places will have a dedicated science desk. So if you are doing something that's science related, you just pitch straight to them, and it's really not that different. That being said, Sometimes when you are pitching to a place that you know doesn't really have a dedicated science desk, being able to narrow down the range of stories that you think will interest them is going to be helpful. What I mean by that is, let's say you want to pitch in Newsweek or something, or Harper's. These aren't really magazines that have like a team of science editors that just are really interested in like a lot of science research. But what would interest them is maybe something about health policy, or maybe something about sort of a science related story, but has really wide implications. That way you can just sort of cater to their tastes a little bit more, and increase the success that or the chance that they'll want your story. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. And then
yeah, Grace had a question, and then we've got a question that I'm going to read off for you. So Grace, go ahead. She's unmuted. It's only a matter of seconds. Grace, it's Maddie from NPR. I can't hear her. All right, let's do, while Grace figures out her microphone, totally acceptable. Really good question. So journalists that are in news organizations get these things called embargoed releases. So that is basically, I will get a press, sometimes a couple days in advance, sometimes a week in advance. I will get a letter from the Journal of Cell Biology saying, hey, next week there's about to be a paper published. And what that allows us to do as journalists is do interviews and write our story before the paper gets published. It's the way that, we're like, hey, a paper just published 10 minutes ago that's about, like concussions in kids, and NPR's John Hamilton has a story that publishes the minute that the piece goes. And that's because we have that week ahead of time. And so what Becky was saying is, as a freelancer who doesn't have an affiliation, how do you get access to those embargoed journals?
Yeah, so I told you guys earlier that I started freelancing when I was still working at Princeton, just as a sort of lab monkey, doing really basic lab work. And at that time, I not only did not have access to embargoed research journals, I also was prohibited from doing so because I was still involved in a research laboratory. But I was desperate to write, and I really wanted to find like things to sell to news publications. And my process at that time was, I don't actually recommend that anybody really does this because it's like it's pretty time intensive, and your rate of success is usually not super high for the amount of time that you spend doing in it. But if you want to do this, this is how you do it. You go onto all the journals. What I would recommend is looking at sort of smaller secondary journals like Frontiers in Field, or maybe one of the lesser sort of the lesser impact nature journals like Scientific Reports. Sometimes those get sort of sneak by interesting studies of those sneak by journalists, and then just like any kind of scientific journal that's that just isn't like Cell, Nature, Science, Ecology, Geology, like whatever the top journals in your field are. Don't go for those. Go for the ones right under those, and just start scanning abstracts and titles of recent papers, maybe like papers in the last month. Also go to the archive. I still do this because I think that cool stuff shows up on the archive. Are you all familiar with the archive? I don't know. I'll just say the archive is arxiv.org. It's a public repository of preprint manuscripts. And if you find things there, and the idea is that maybe you'll come across something in the humongous pile of articles that are published or released publicly every day, that is going to be of interest to a mainstream publication or whatever publication you're pitching to. I pretty much did this for like half a year before I got access to those embargoed research journals. And I still every once in a while will scan some of my favorite ones of these, like Frontiers, the Archive, and the GSA papers. The other thing you can do is,
Angus, can you check in the chat and see if that's right? I just sent it.
Yeah, let's see. I actually don't see anything in the chat. Am I missing something?
So is it arxiv.org? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So you guys, if unlike Angus can see the chat, I just posted it, and I'll post it in the Slack channel too. Keep going, Angus. Sorry, I didn't mean
and to Sadie, yes, I have used. I have looked in bioRxiv, but I can't actually recall if I've ever done a story that I first found in bioRxiv. I have done one on Physics Archive. That was like a story, like someone had released a preprint manuscript about the physics of baking pizza, which is like not really something you might find in a serious journal like Science or Nature, but something that, like some scientists did for fun and showed up in the archive, and like everybody wants to, like, if you're interested in cooking, if you like pizza, then maybe you would read this article, right? And the other thing I would say to do if you don't have embargoed research access and you want to write science stories is to look at existing science stories, see if, in the process of reading these news articles, there is some question that pops in your head and you think, oh, like, what about this weird thing? Has anyone answered this particular question? And if the answer is no, maybe try to find someone who knows about that, and that could be a story.
So a question was, are the articles on there peer reviewed?
I don't think so. I think a lot of the time when things show up on archive, they're not yet peer reviewed. Mm-hmm. Peer review, from what I understand, is a formal process that the journal initiates by like recruiting reviewers from your peers. And so bioRxiv or archive is not really like that. You just upload your preprint. But it's actually, yeah.
The other thing is, just to be clear, you don't have to be at a journalistic institution to get access to embargoed journals. So when I first signed up for access to embargoed journals, there were two options, and that was show us that you're affiliated with a journalistic organization, or upload 3 bylines that you have so that they can see that you are a freelance reporter or a reporter or someone who's, not just like writing your own like blog that you've developed on your own WordPress account. But if you have bylines from Scientific American or NPR or that kind of stuff, you can get access to those independent of having a journalistic affiliation. And if you're, for example, some of the people that wrote through the office hours program, which we can talk about a little bit at the end, have a byline. You normally need more than one of those to get embargoed access, but part of what the office hours program is meant to do is help you build relationships with an editor. So like Sadie got published at The Salt and worked pretty closely with some of the editors at NPR. Now Sadie can email people independent of the office hours program and be like, hey, it's Sadie again. I just wrote that piece on bees. Are you interested in taking this other story? So you have your foot in the door. So if you can get a couple of bylines, you can actually apply for Nature embargo and a general science embargo, independent of having a journalistic affiliation. So Grace, I've heard you've gotten your microphone fixed. Let's hear that question. Grace. Yep. She's doing it? Okay. She wrote it to me just in case you couldn't figure it out. So in terms of editor relationships, what do you find, what's the process for establishing those relationships? What's the requirement, that the amount of time it takes? Having written a piece for an editor that they like, can you consider that editor a reliable resource, or does it take longer than just one piece that you've developed together?
I would say it depends on what you're going for, but I'll answer the first question first. You can meet editors in probably 2 main ways. one is by going to conferences or that they might attend. So a lot of science journalists go to AAAS every year. A lot of them will go to like AGU or other big meetings that happen. And so if you're there, like, I think I recall from the last time I went to AAAS, there is just like a journalist corner where you can like pick up coffee and things like that. Just like crash it and talk to people there. And that would probably be a good way to meet editors or reporters who can put you in touch with editors. The second way is to just find their email address. I'll use NPR as an example. Pretty much everybody at NPR has the email address format, first initial last name at npr.org. And so you could basically figure out anybody's email address if you know their first and last name. Then look up on the masthead or wherever, like maybe they have a bio somewhere. Figure out what section they edit or what their role is. And if you have a story that you think will interest them based on what they've done previously or what section they edit, then just pitch that story to them. What I always do when I'm pitching someone new, or actually when I'm pitching anybody ever, in the subject line, I write in all caps pitch, and then I have a colon, and then I have a title for the pitch, which is like hopefully a catchy, like cool headline that will make them go like, ooh, like I want that, And that's a little bit risky, obviously, because you're sort of cold calling them. Also, speaking of cold calling, never actually phone somebody the first time. Like people hate that. Just always email if you're going to reach out to someone. But it is a little bit more risky because they don't know you, and you have to get lucky enough that they might be feeling good that day and feeling like they want to like read random pitch emails from random writers. But most people, I think, are pretty receptive. And if you are going to do that, just say somewhere in the email who you are. If you have other bylines at other publications, say that so that you can establish a little bit of credibility as a writer. If one story is enough. Yeah, I would say if you write one story for them and they like it and it does fine, then that is pretty much all you really need to get going. I don't wait too long in between sending that pitch and the next one because they'll forget who you are in like 2 months. So like if you can send them something else within a month or something, there's probably a good chance that they'll remember you and be like, oh yeah, that's right, you did this story for me and that was pretty good. So let me go ahead and just check to see what else you've got going here.
Yeah, so I would say the same thing, especially like if you're coming through the office hours program and we kind of like set you guys up on a date with your editor and you get it accepted and publish. Like Angus said, it's really important not to wait, and then say like, 6 or 7 months ago, I published this thing. I don't think it's the end of the world, but the more, consistently you're in their brain, the better. And I can say that there are freelancers at NPR that are like freelancers that we go to time and time again. And there's like a list of freelancers, and Angus is one of them, where they're like, we will definitely seriously consider a pitch from Angus because we have so much history of working with him. And so what you need to do is get yourself into that little area of like, we're interested in what they're going to pitch. So that's another thing. Okay, we had another question. Actually, you can just say it, but are you restricted to open access articles as a freelancer? Can you get around this in any way?
Yeah, you're not restricted to open access articles. That would be a crazy restriction because in terms of scientific articles overall, open access is a relatively small proportion. I would say that almost no publication will say like, oh, I'm not going to take this story idea because the science articles on it are not open access. if you need the journal article, there's two ways you can get that fairly easily. You can say, hey, I'm a writer, I'm interested in your research. Can you, like, to the author of that report, like, I'm interested in your research, can you send me some of these papers so I can read them? And people like will always, like, pretty much always send you their papers. The other way you can do it is reach out to the publication and find their sort of press office or media office and say, hey, like, I know that you published this paper, like, last month or last week, whatever. Can you send me a PDF of that paper because I'm interested in writing about it for this publication? And pretty much, again, like, they'll almost always send you that PDF.
Oh, I think that's great. Yulia, does that answer your question? Do you want to follow up with anything? I'm going to assume that is a yes, Yulia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I was wondering more, so like for what I do, I have to do a lot of research, like through Google Scholar. I like check through multiple, sources to try to find exactly what I need. And I'm a PhD student now, so I'm worried, like, if I go into freelancing after I'm done, like, having institutional access to these journals, like, how do I do that level of research? Can I, like, pay for 1 credit hour or something at a university?
Yeah, okay. I would say, so I would say that is definitely not necessary. You could do that if you want, but the way I go about doing this is, if I need to do a lot of research and read a lot of papers, and I don't have access to sort of the full PDF of that paper, then I'll pretty much do the same thing. I'll just reach, but in this case, usually I don't want to bother the authors. Just if I'm trying to get papers from them, and I am not sure if I'm actually going to end up writing a story, because it's kind of, it's sort of a time commitment on their behalf, and if I think there's a low chance I'm going to actually interview them for the story, then I don't really want to bother them. But definitely just go reach out to press offices at these institutions and these papers. If you do sort of your work ahead of time, abstracts are always free. So if you see an abstract and you think, okay, this could be a relevant paper for the research that I'm doing, and then just compile a list of sort of all the papers you want to see from one publishing group, like Springer Nature or something, then you can reach out to the press officers at Springer Nature and say, hey, I would like to see these 5 or 6 PDFs that have been published in different Nature journals or different Springer journals, and just get them all at once. I would be shocked if a press officer denied you access. If you were saying, like, I'm doing research for a story that I'm writing for media. The other thing that you can do, this is up to you, but I have done this in the past where I've just gone to friends who have institutional access, they're grad students or professors or postdocs at places, and just say, hey, can you get me this PDF, if it's just sort of like short and quick and not going to be too much of a burden on them. But
yeah, I'm not saying I've done that, but I'm not saying that I haven't done that. You know what I mean? It takes a while after you graduate for them to shut down that PubMed authentication you have. But I completely agree with Angus. Do not give an academic institution any more of your money or time.
Yeah.
I found that scientists are also super okay with sharing their papers, as long as you're like, I will strictly adhere to the embargo guidelines. Like, let me know when this paper is going to be published, and I'll, like those kinds of things. And press officers' jobs are to get out the word about that piece. So if you're like, I want to do something on this, most of the time they're going to give it to you. And if you have any trouble, let me know, and you can CC me on that so that they know that you're not like some weird internet troll. I also, Jesse Dunnis is on this call. So Jesse has been a Fajobi since the inception of Fajobis, and So Jesse, if you have anything to like add, so Jesse was working as a scientist and a freelancer right now. He's kind of made that freelance transition out of academia. Jesse, feel free to chime in with things that like different perspectives on Angus. Like, unfortunately, we don't have time to be like, yeah, I agree with Angus. But if there's any other like perspective or tool you've been able to use, let us know about that. And also, if we have time at the end, maybe you could share a little bit about your little journey as well. But just so that everybody knows, Jesse is one of the scientists in our community that's done this. I think I don't know, Jesse, would you say successfully? And so,
somewhat successfully.
Yeah. So
I haven't ever done it full time, but I did do it in grad school in parallel with being a grad student, and I did it, I would say, like 30% time or 40% maybe after grad school.
So we can talk a little bit more with Jesse after we use up all of Angus's time, but anything else that you've like, any other ways to get access to journals or anything that you've heard that you want to talk about, just like definitely chime in.
Yeah.
I do want to flag, in case people didn't see it in the chat, that the service that I think is probably most used for getting access is Eureka Alert, and they will give access to freelancers if you send them clips.
Yeah, and I will, I'm going to try to, I haven't really been taking active notes, but I will try to summarize all this stuff that we talked about with Angus and post it in the general channel that's like ideas for, building relationships and, how to get access to stuff and all that kind of stuff. Hannah, you have a question for our two freelancers. What do you got?
Hi, can you hear me? Yay, okay. So you talked about before how obviously if something is published in a big journal, everyone's going to have covered it already. I guess, what are your thoughts on kind of trying to cover a project that's happening where results haven't yet been published, and how would you go about that and pitching that versus pitching something that already has published results?
Angus, you go first.
Okay, so this is a pretty common problem that I run into, because if you want to do something about work that is unpublished, it can actually be difficult to get people to cooperate because they don't want to sort of hurt their chances of publishing in a peer-reviewed journal if their sort of specific results have already been discussed in the media. I know that in the past there's been some agreement between media and the scientific journal publishing industry that if you do something on ongoing work that has been presented at a conference, then you can talk about the results presented at the conference, but nothing else. There's also a couple other ways to do this. You can, if the scientist agrees to this, you can do a story about kind of maybe part of the process that they're going through right now. So if they are doing research where they have to travel somewhere and do some crazy thing to get their data, then you can go and maybe do a story about that particular process without revealing their specific results from this trial. Was there another part of the question?
Yeah, I guess so. Do you have suggestions for kind of pitching and writing those process stories? And if you've had like success with that, or if it's easier to get like results-based stuff published?
I would say it's easier to get results-based stuff published for sure. It's got a little bit more meat to it because, if you're doing a process story, you're basically doing the same story minus the results. That being said, there's a lot of really interesting process stories that have been done and will continue to be done. If you can find, the trick is to find the right kind of content, I think. If you can find something that has some kind of really exciting or really different sort of journey to it or aspect to it, that's it's going to like capture people's imaginations or show something that's really important, then that's one way to do it. To give you sort of maybe a couple of like big, maybe dramatic examples. There were tons of stories done on the Higgs boson research before they discovered the Higgs boson, right? So that is a story that like, you know, people were working on, and they were saying like, well, if we find this thing, you know, it could sort of upend our this piece of our understanding of physics. Another one would be the Ebola outbreak, the sort of the big one that happened in 2014. And you know, there was lots of stories done on people looking for how this outbreak had started and where it had started, and you know, people sort of doing the work to kind of identify the sort of the epidemiology of this outbreak. So you know, both of those are essentially process stories, but they have this element to them that is going to make them really exciting, even without those results.
Another really useful way I think you can get into a process story is if you manage to write a profile of either a person or a lab. You can, I mean, it's a little bit harder sometimes to get to that point where they trust you enough to do something that's not just a straight news story. At least that's what I've seen. I've never actually tried to write a profile, so I can't speak from experience there. But that's what I've heard. And but if you can get that that pitch to land, then you can talk about the people involved in the process without necessarily having to have their final results.
Yeah, and then I would also, just to pitch my own stories on this, this is why I've brought you all here today. All of the video series that I host at NPR that's called Maddie About Science is specifically about the people and the processes of science. So one example would be the story that I did on the self-driving car. There was actually no data, no results from that study. It's a current study that's trying to describe how basically how people are studying the human model of driving behavior in order to put that into artificial intelligence systems. And it was because they built this like fake car, like this real car, 360-degree simulation, the actual process of the video, or the process of the science is like putting a bunch of strange, like weird people into cars and judging how fast they can get out of the way of a dog, or like when people are swerving, or like you're in a drunk driving situation. All of those stories are strictly process based, but what they have is, because it's video, they have a visual component, they have a really interesting scientist, and they have a really interesting problem associated with them. So people want to know about self-driving cars. People want to know about animals that are about to become extinct, but none of those have results-based. So I definitely don't do it like the best in the business, but all of those stories we pitched and got accepted by NPR that are strictly process-based, almost no results. Okay, let's go to, there's a couple more paws in the air. Nikki Forrester, ask us your question.
Okay. Is this working? Maybe.
There you go. Try it. Yeah. Try. Yeah, try. Let's see. It's not working to me.
So my question is, I'm kind of transitioning from research to freelancing as well. And I'm currently located in West Virginia, and I've noticed that a lot of fellowship opportunities and other things are generally based in cities, and one of the appeals of freelancing is that you can be located anywhere. So I'm wondering if you can just speak to maybe the importance of where you're located in terms of meeting people as a freelancer and getting resources and access to things that help you kind of learn about transitioning into journalism.
That is that's a tough question. Since I haven't spent too much time away from cities since I started doing this thing. I'm based in New York City right now. I guess one benefit of freelancing is that you don't really need that many resources to get started. You essentially need to be able to invest a lot of time into finding stories, and then you need a good internet connection and something to write on, and maybe a phone so you can call sources, unless you plan on visiting sources, which you can do as well. There are also fellowships out there that are not location based. They're sort of maybe like topic or idea based. One of these is the Helen, I think, or is that right? Is it the there's like a Carter Fellowship for Mental Health Journalism, which they fund a certain amount of cash to mid to early career journalists to do stories about mental health. So there's a few of those like that you can try to find. Kind of hard. It's hard to think about all of the ones just sort of off the top of my head. There's another one at Reveal if you're interested in investigative reporting that is mostly remote because they're funding you to do specifically an investigative project. But there's a couple different ones, and one of them does require you to be in the San Francisco Bay Area for a period of time, but that's like a training period. So you're not like tied down to that place if you're interested in living somewhere else. Finally, there are also other training fellowships like the Knight Fellowships that will basically help you train into a new beat or train as a journalist. And these are located in Boston and Ann Arbor, Michigan. And they're typically a year long. So if you can commit to being in one place for a year, then there's a lot of fellowship opportunities and training opportunities that will sort of help you transition if that's what you're interested in.
The other thing is, Nikki, is that because journalists tend to be so city-centric as far as where we live, there's actually a huge desire for people that live in areas that can actually go and take pictures and talk to people. So it's actually, you know, especially in West Virginia, just because there's a ton of focus around like science and coal, not necessarily like, is coal good, but more like what has the coal industry done to the health of people in these cities. So, you know, living in an area, what you actually want to do is to focus towards like rural focused magazines, organization outlets. I mean, there are entire outlets that are specifically focused towards, you know, like rural health. And so what you can do is, you know, think about the fact that you are in an area that very few journalists have access to in a long-term way, can actually be kind of a strength for you. And again, the majority of what we do as, you know, as journalists and freelancers is remote. You know what I mean? Like we call sources from our office. We have a lot more, you know, obviously at a newsroom, you have a lot more resources, but for print journalism, what I'm doing and what you're doing, I'm not like going to all of these places to do all these stories. I'm sitting at my desk talking to researchers from San Francisco. You know what I mean? So, but what you are missing, and I think that is what you talked about in the beginning of your question, is that ability to just connect with people at like conferences and that kind of stuff. And that is, I think, going to be a real downside to that. But you also like have access to people. You also live in the community. People in communities tend to trust people that live in those communities too. Like an NPR researcher in the middle of coal, or an NPR investigative reporter in the middle of coal country is going to have a harder time building trust than like Nikki Forrester, who's from this town, or, you know, or lives in this town. So keep in mind that the majority of what we're doing is remote anyways, and that actually might be something that you can exploit that like somebody like Angus or I would never have the opportunity to sit in a town for a week and do a bunch of really interesting interviews on people. So keep that in mind a little bit. Yeah, go on, Wachowski.
Sorry. I wanted to say that Laura Holmes let me know that they have a program at Washington Post where you can sign up to be a freelancer for them on the ground, and they're really interested in people who aren't living in the big cities. Like WAPO can get people in Chicago, they can get people in LA, but they have a lot of trouble getting reporters on the ground to get tape, especially in those small communities. So you might want to look into that program. It's called like the Talent Network, I think. And so I just wanted to like point out that like you could be a massive asset for them if you're like, hey, I'm in this place that's hard to reach and I'm already trained in journalism.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Sorry, I was trying to find that. Sadie, you want to do a little Googling and put that in the chat? Okay, thanks, Sadie. Yeah. Okay, who else do we have? Do you guys have Any more questions right away? I know we're getting close to time, but I want to make sure that we have questions. And this has been like a really interesting, and it's clear to me that you guys are very focused on this. So we can do another one of these chats where you can send your questions ahead of time and we can do them. But I think Angus has told us a lot about, you know, like what the life of a freelancer is like, what it's like to build relationships, some of the resources that we can put you in touch with, especially getting, you know, embargoed stuff specifically might be interesting for you. But let's make sure. Does anybody else have any questions that they didn't get to say? Is that you again, Sadie? Okay, go on.
Two questions. I wanted to ask, when you pitch a story and it doesn't get accepted by your first organization, how often do you have a list of like 2 or 3 other places that you're thinking of pitching? And do you just start going down a list, or is it like, well, that was my idea for NPR and now I have to start all over again? And then my second question was, how often do you push for higher rates after you've established a report with the editor?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So the first question is, if your pitch doesn't get accepted somewhere, do you pitch it to somewhere else? And the answer to that is yes. If you think that you have a really good story idea, then definitely start looking for other people to pitch to if your first choice doesn't take it. In fact, I know people who, if they think they have a really good idea and it's time sensitive, they'll say in the pitch, I'm pitching this to other people at the same time because, you know, this is something that needs to be done as soon as possible. And I don't want to sit on my hands with this story. And then it basically lets editors know that, you know, if they don't respond to you quickly and say either yes or no, then you may already have taken the story somewhere else. The other thing is, if you have a story and you pitch it somewhere and they they decide not to take it, then two things can sort of go through your head. One is, is this just a bad story idea and it's not going to get accepted anywhere, and I should just sort of let go of it? That's a completely reasonable thing to do. A lot of you're not going to be successful with every story idea 100% of the time, right? And if someone sort of rejects it on your first try, that usually, to me, is an indicator that well, maybe this isn't that great of a story idea to begin with. I should evaluate it and decide if I want to try pitching it to other people. Because that is also going to be time that you spend doing something that you might not get paid for, and time that they have to spend looking at it. So it's sort of like pick your battles kind of thing.
And the other thing, Angus, just to keep in mind is that when we say pitch it to another place, you're literally not copying and pasting that. So that's why Angus is saying it's time consuming. You want to tailor each pitch to each place specifically. And so that will take time. And every time you send a pitch to an editor that doesn't get accepted, it's kind of like, I don't know if you feel this way, Angus, but it's like, I want to keep my percentages high with editors because so they'll think about 50% of the pitches that Maddie sends me, I take. Versus Maddie sends me 10 stories a week and they're 90% garbage. You know what I mean? So you kind of it's just it's like dating, in which you're just I'm going to throw some things out there and I'm going to make sure I give you my best stuff to continue this relationship going forward. So I would say that there are some negatives to over pitching specific people for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, sometimes you think well, maybe it's better to keep the powder dry, on this and sort of put it aside. Also, just because, if you think you have something really interesting, sometimes people don't take it because it's not the right time for it. And so then the goal is to figure out when the right time to do that story is and how you can sort of make it fit with whatever's happening or have a new reason for why you need to do the story now. The other question you asked was about rates. I'm really glad you asked this question, actually, because this is something I really want to talk about for any of you who are considering trying to make an earning freelancing. And rates is a really contentious topic in the freelance world, because there's okay, well, I'll say that it's a really complicated issue. But the simple answer to your question is that once you have been working with people for a certain amount of time, or you've sort of done a few stories for them that were turned out really well, yeah, you can negotiate for higher rates with that organization, whatever you think is fair. It's hard to know what is fair, and I'll also send this link out later, but there are a few sort of public Excel or sort of Google Sheets documents that people maintain, that just says what the freelancer rate is at every publication they've ever worked at. And so it will say like, Nat Geo, $2 a word per print or something like that, or Nat Geo, $1 per word on web. Or like WNYC, $500 for a 3-minute reported story. So that way you can kind of look at these and know if you're getting a good deal or not. And if you're not getting a good deal, so like you know that other people are getting paid more than you for the same work, then bring that up with the editor and say, hey, like you're not really giving me a fair rate according to what you've paid other people for the same type of work, and for what the sort of the market is like for freelancers right now. So yeah, so I would say that's really important, and having a good relationship with the editor will make them more receptive to your negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, tell us a little bit more about that, Angus, because I think that's really awkward, right? Like it can't be a comfortable conversation. And I think when you're I know like, I think NPR has this thing where like the first piece that you get in is going to be, you're going to get paid less for that initial piece. And then you get paid more on subsequent pieces, right? But it's not, it's right?
No.
Well, I mean, that is how it is now, as far as when they accept a first-time new freelancer, they pay less than they will on the second and third times. That is like the way it is for some of the blogs now. I don't know when the last time you freelanced with NPR is, but that's the way it is now. That's like a new cool thing they're doing to pay people very little money at first. And Angus will say NPR's freelance rates are really low, which especially at an organization like with a science desk of 45 people, they're not really looking to bring in a ton of freelance pieces. So they don't really have to pay people that much because they don't really need to be competitive in that space. But, how do you approach that subject, especially if you've already been writing for like give me like word for word what you would say to an editor when you realize that you should be getting paid for more for work than you've already been doing, like agreed upon rates.
Yeah. So usually the way this works is it's usually like on a sort of a per story basis. And I've sort of run into some awkward situations where we didn't really discuss pay before sort of agreeing on the story, sort of greenlighting the story. And then afterwards, they're like, oh, we were sort of thinking that we should pay you this much. And then I was like, oh, well, that doesn't really make sense for like, what I did. So can you pay me more? And that's like a bad situation. And to avoid that, you should always discuss the rate before you agree to do a story. So if they say, hey, the story idea is really great, why don't you go for it? Just shoot them an email right back and say, like, that sounds wonderful. Can you tell me what the rate or like how much you're going to pay me for it? And just be very straightforward. Be friendly if you can. But I think the most important thing is to be very clear and direct, and not say like, I don't know, like, don't say like really weird stuff. Like sometimes sometimes I hear of people saying like really weird stuff when they're asking for more money as a freelancer, like showing editors photos of their kids and being like, oh, these are my kids, like, can you pay me more? Which is, I think, just makes things more awkward. The thing to remember is that this is just a business transaction. Be professional, and it's going to be just a really regular negotiation, and it doesn't affect or should not affect your relationship with that editor. I don't think an editor would ever sort of like begrudge you for trying to negotiate for a higher rate. And if they are that kind, and if they do, then don't work with that editor anymore, because it's going to be really difficult for you to negotiate with them going forward.
So like the main thing is to after the pitch or the piece is accepted, right then, before you start going back and forth with them in any way, ask about the rate for the piece.
Yeah. Ask them about the rate. You can even propose a rate if you like sort of just want to jump right on it. Say, how does like $600 sound for this story or something like that. They may just come back and say like, oh, we can't do that, but how does like this number sound? And I don't think there's anything weird about that or awkward about it. It's just it's just a part of the work that you do. Freelancing, yes, you're a writer. Yes, it's kind of a creative type of profession, but you should view your living as if you are running a small business and your product is storytelling. And so publications are your clients, and you should treat them as clients. Like, talk to them the way you would imagine. This is coming from someone who's like never done like real business in his life, but
it sounds good though. It sounds right.
Yeah.
It sounds right. Keep saying it. Who are the clients, Angus?
Yeah, talk to them like you would as if you were like selling them something, which you are. The other thing I want to say is that a lot of places offer really bad rates, and you'll find that if you work for a lot of those places, the amount of work you put into the story and amount you get paid comes out to something like way less than minimum wage. And if you notice that this is happening, that you need to either negotiate a better rate or find some other people to work for. I understand that in the beginning, when you're first starting out, it's really difficult to do this because you don't feel like you have a lot of power or the ability to go to other people. You don't have a network of relationships yet. And you just need bylines. Like that's it. Like you just need bylines. I really sympathize with that position because I've been there. But the other thing is that a lot of places that accept new young freelancers also have standardized rates that are going to be a little bit better than what you might see at other places. So one of those places is Science. They have a section on their webpage called Science News Science Now or Snow. And this has not an excellent rate, but not a terrible rate. And if you can be efficient about writing these types of stories, then you can sort of scrape by, which is not saying much, I know, but at least it will give you bylines, and it doesn't sort of put you in this position where you have to like struggle to get an extra $50 on your rate from a publication that's only paying you $250 or $300 for a story that you spend 4 days doing,
What are some, and if you don't feel comfortable with this, that's totally cool, but what are some publications? So Science Now, I've also written for them. It's really fair what they're, especially because it's like, they do a lot of these, I think this is what I'm talking, yeah, I did. It's like basically a extended caption, like these quick snips. And those are really competitive and really fast and don't require a lot of time. What are some other, this was what we'll wrap up on. What are some other publications that you think have decent rates and fair rates? And everybody understand that what you will get paid and what Angus is getting paid might be different based on the fact that Angus has doing longer stories or has a relationship with them or whatever. So I know you said Scientific American pays really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they pay, I would say, like market rate for print magazines, which is about $1 to $2 per word. Print magazines tend to pay better than newspapers or sort of like blog network type things. The most print magazines that I've worked for have paid me at least $1 per word. So like Out magazine, I did a story for them a little while back, and that was about $1 per word. I think the Village Voice, also in New York City, pays about $1 per word. So local print publications are also a thing to go for. I know it sort of sounds like I think sometimes people have this impression that like, oh, if I want to get paid more, I should go for like the big national media organizations that have the most money. That's not necessarily true. A lot of the times, local places will pay you competitive rates as well. Like California Sunday, I think also pays like $1.50 per word for the print section, and maybe the online section too. Not totally sure. I'll send around this Google Doc that has rates for pretty much everybody on it, and that will give you a really good sense of what the field is like. Don't accept. Well, I won't say don't do it, because you're free to do whatever you want. But rates that are very, very difficult to make a living on are ones that are under 500 per story. And like for a regular news story that may be like 600 to 800 words. Yeah, if it's like, around $400 to $200, it's like, and you're trying to write 1 or 2 of those a week, you'll find that you're just not making enough money. So there's also, Yulia has a question, says, is there a rate, like a price per word? Yeah, so that's like, for a lot of print periodicals, it's like $1 per word. And then hourly. So if I do editing contracts for journalism, I usually charge about $50 per hour. Depending on who it is, sometimes it's more. It can go up to $75 per hour. If you do fact checking, that's also a really good way to make money. As a freelancer, I don't do any fact checking, but I have a lot of freelance friends who do, and they get paid around the same, like $50 to $75 per hour.
And just to interrupt, sorry, Yulia was also asking, if you have to do interviews and background research and you have like multiple interviews, multiple points of perspective, you will get paid more. So like through the office hours program, we'll do pieces that are like opinion pieces, or like, this is my experience as a scientist, and you're going to get, and we have asked, when we first started the office hours program, people weren't getting paid at all. And then we asked places like Scientific American for these kind of like opinion pieces to pay our scientists at least $250 per piece. And that's because those are not like, multiple day, multiple interview, fact checking, those kind of pieces. So if you do a true news story, like what Angus does, which is where you do multiple interviews, you probably have access to an embargoed journal, you're going to get paid more than if you do these like, nature jobs or science careers where scientists write about their careers, or like, I had a baby in graduate school, or this is what it's like to do this, like those kind of stories that don't require multiple other sources, you're going to get paid significantly less for. So just keep that in mind. Let us thank Angus, who has definitely talked to us for longer than he agreed to. I'm going to do like a combination of note-taking and all of these resources and put them into one document that's like our summary of Angus's chat. I will put that all together. And if somebody somebody had asked for me to talk about the office hours program through NPR, I will talk about that program for like 2 minutes right now, but I have an interview for a story in 5 minutes. So I'm going to talk to you right now. Let's all thank Angus. And if you guys have follow-up questions that you didn't get to ask or something, send them to me and I will ask Angus to get them back to us on his time. So thank you, Angus.
Yeah, you can also email me if you want to ask me something. You can get that from Maddie as well.
Yeah, I'll send out his email now that you said that you are okay with that. So,
I am with it.
Okay, cool. If anybody wants to, so Angus, go on, get back to your life of selling yourself and your stories.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so if anybody wants to hear about the office hours program and doesn't know about it, I'll talk about it very rapidly right now. And Sadie, will you stick around to give some feedback? Okay, so like I said, I have very little time, but the office hours program you can find out way more about. There's a community resource sheet for the Fajobis. Burley, will you put that in the chat? Thanks. That has basically a sign-up sheet and like a brief overview of what it is. Right now we are in a break so that I can build evaluations for that program, but basically we take you from pitch to publish at an organization. And that's not a guarantee. We will pitch it. We don't guarantee that they will publish it. But you send a pitch in, and I help you kind of focus that pitch. You pitch to an organization that we have either established a relationship with, or if you're feeling rowdy, you can pitch it to somewhere else, but that means that you format the pitch in their specifications, so you have to find out that information by using the Google. You pitch to an organization in their style, and then I accept the pitch. I talk about how to strengthen that pitch. We set you up with a professional editor, and they talk to you on the phone. This is a new thing we've been doing recently. They talk to you on the phone before you write your piece at all about how you should structure that piece. Then we go through a round of peer editing, and then Joe Pauka, who is the science correspondent at NPR that started this, gives you an NPR edit for free, which is wildly invaluable and would cost you a lot of money if you weren't doing it through this program. And then what we do is we send your piece, after we're comfortable with it, to an editor with UCC. So we establish that relationship for you with the editor and say, hey, this is a piece. It's been edited by several people, so it's in pretty good shape, which gives you a better foot in the door. And then they can choose whether or not to accept that. I think we have the majority of places that are accepting pieces from scientists don't pay at all, but we have 5 of them that pay. 2 different NPR blogs that have taken pieces, Popular Science, Scientific American, Vox, and Vox, they pay, but the rates are pretty low. And I actually am going to put together a rate sheet. For a while, we were just trying to get you guys paid at all, and now I want to make sure that you're not getting paid total garbage, because NPR, for a first freelance initiation, what does it say to you? Like, how much was it? Did you get paid for that B piece?
I got paid $200 for a 900-word piece with 3 interviews.
What's that?
200 for a 900-word piece.
Okay. 900. Yeah. So that's like really low, but the idea behind that is that that's just like the in the door. And then they said that subsequent pieces you would be paid more for. Is that correct?
I have a 2-second follow-up. I've been marinating on actually.
Right. But that was what they said was that the following pieces you could get paid more for.
Yeah, that was
Okay, cool. I will make sure that that's the case, because we're definitely not trying to take advantage of you guys. But that is the way that goes. That's over about a month of time. Give or take, depending on how fast you go. So you pitch to me, we set you up with a professional editor, you get peer edits, you get Joe's edit, and then we pitch. That's the whole process. Does anybody have quick question? Oh yeah, and Burley just put in the chat, the community resource sheet that gives you like a very quick explanation of it. And also at the bottom of that sheet is the sign up tab, and you just put your email in there, and then you'll get emails about the office hours program. Does anybody have any quick questions? You don't need to raise your hand, just talk at me, because there's only 10 of us in here now. 19, never mind. But it is competitive. There are a lot of you. We now have 1,000 Fajobies, whoop whoop. And so I will do a call out for a pitch. You pitch as soon as you can, especially because we've taken a couple months off. So if you want to write, get your pitch ready for February. About the last week of January, I'll make a call out for pitches. And we do 5 accepted pitches, and that's not based on you being like, hey, I'm going to write this month. And then I'm like, okay, they're locked in. It's you send me a pitch, it's good enough, I accept it. Then we move on to the next person, and we do that for 5 people each month. We have now had 50 pieces accepted in the last year and a half from scientists, which is more than I've published at NPR. So it is pretty successful. Our pitch acceptance rate is about 50%, which is really high. And I think some other people that can talk to you about the pros and cons of those. That. Can we send multiple pitches during the call out? No, just send me your best one. If you've written something for a nonfiction writing class and you just don't know where to send it, that's fine. You just have to write it in a pitch format and send it to me. It's okay if you already have it written. That's great, actually. So, all right. Any other quick questions? Is it locked? Hang on a second.
seen you walk by earlier looking for you.
No, I didn't. I'm on a video call with
Oh, sorry.
the scientists with the jokes. Any other questions? Nobody? Anybody? Sadie, what did you, tell me about your experience doing it. Give me the 2-minute preview.
Yeah, I thought it was really helpful, especially to speak with the professional editor ahead of time. I hadn't written the piece yet, but I outlined the general ideas of what I wanted to cover, and she helped me kind of identify the things that not just I found interesting, but that my audience would find interesting, so that I was formatting in a way that like my story was a little bit amorphous in the directions it could go, and she really helped me hone that down so that when I wrote the piece, I had one clear thread that then I just had to edit as I went. Yeah, chatting on the phone with Joe was great after he gave me his edits. Once I got it accepted by NPR, it took a little bit for it to go live and to get paid. And I felt awkward pestering, but it turns out that's pretty normal, just like sending emails to check in and say, hey, so glad I saw it went live. You know, just want to make sure that you're processing my payment or there's nothing I need to do. But yeah, it really wasn't that long. I was just super anxious because I was really excited about it. And it was over Thanksgiving break. So like, yeah, things were a little out of sorts, but I thought it was really great and super helpful. And now I include that in every one of my pitch emails saying, I've published at NPR. So that helps.
Yeah, the idea is to get you guys a byline and a relationship out of it, and that you can use that to kind of move forward with your freelance business. Okay, I have to go do an interview. I'm going to post this, and then I'll also aggregate all the resources that Angus talked to us about. So yeah, all right, everybody have a good day. Go get paid.